Hi, it's Carol Salter reading chapter 9 of Witch on the Warpath. We left the fairy and the leprechauns in dire straits last week when an owl attacked Onk's hat. Let's see what happened. Chapter 9. Gone. Can you see him, Miles? Asked a worried Finley, concerned for Seamus's safety as he searched the black water in front of him. No, I can't, snapped Miles, feeling more than a little guilty about questioning Seamus's plan in the light of his obvious bravery. Be Jesus, you don't think he's drowned dead, do you? Asked Finley in horror and no small amount of awe. Nah, he's a leprechaun like us, isn't he? Replied Miles, looking over at his acquaintance. He was so dim sometimes, he thought. Oh, of course he is, affirmed Finley when he remembered this fact about leprechauns. From the water over to the left came a loud sound of enraged splashing. Try to drown me, would you? Come back here! I'll pluck you like a chicken, you see if I don't. Seamus emerged, red-faced and spitting. He was covered in water weeds, and using his shillelagh as a prop, looked not unlike a miniature Neptune arising from the depths. Come back here! Seamus shouted into the empty air, the fairy and Onk long forgotten. Oh, Seamus, you gave us such a fright, so you did, responded Finley, trying to help wring the water out of his friend's clothes. Didn't he give us a fright, Miles? Asked Finley, looking to the third leprechaun for confirmation. Oh, so he did, nodded Miles, bemused and thinking hard. What you need now is a nice warm toddy inside you, so you do, he suggested. Realising he might be able to steer Seamus's thoughts in that direction, given the soaking he'd received. With a roaring fire, complimented Finley, looking over at Miles behind Seamus's back and winking. Seamus looked at his two companions, a huge smile breaking out across his dripping face. Ah, he exclaimed, you two know the way to a leprechaun's heart, so you do. Arm in arm, the three of them headed off down Lower Ham Road to the nearest licensed establishment to partake of their local brew. They hadn't a care in the world. With a spring in their step and all heroic deeds done for the night, their thoughts turned to sustenance, warmth, and a pretty Irish colleen. Onk hadn't gone far. He was looking for a new hat to keep his hair dry. He found it nestled in the bottom of an overflowing litter bin. Casting objects aside like a toddler from the inside of his pram, Onk dug deep till he found the battered remains of the supermarket carrier bag. The name on it reminded him of home. He smiled, forcing it down on his head, the handles looping snugly under his ears. The smell and the holes in it didn't matter. Onk admired it. Gone, he repeated, his large brown eyes filling with tears. By now we can surmise that he meant the fairy babe and not his dog blanket hat. The troll wandered along the south side of the Thames, heading in an easterly direction. The sun had long since shuffled off to bed, and a thin veil of darkness was being pulled across the blue sky, increasing the moon's luminescence. A short while later, Onk's feet found him standing outside a deserted and derelict Victorian house. Stamping hard with his dustbin-lid feet, he made a path through the 4-foot weeds and thistles, the original red-tiled path long since smothered. Onk stumbled inside to rest his weary limbs and sort out his confused head. He saw visions of a windmilling owl, talons outstretched, circling his hat. What in the 12 dimensions had he done to upset the old bird, he wondered. Tramping round inside the property, Onk found what had once been a magnificent drawing room, complete with chandeliers and marble fireplaces. The chandeliers had long gone. The fireplaces had been torn out, and, with the passage of time, the ornate plaster ceilings were hanging down, showing the underneath of the upstairs floorboards, riddled with woodworm and dry rot. The windows had been smashed by vandals long ago, and graffiti-strewn walls announced to those unlucky enough to chance upon them that Wayne loved Kylie and Nigel was a star. Onk lowered himself down on the floorboards in one corner after he discovered several full rat traps around the house. They made a tasty, if small, snack. The neighbour, whose traps they were, would be grateful but perplexed come morning, finding only their feet remaining. Onk wasn't partial to rat feet. Onk fell asleep for the second time since supper. This time his slumber wasn't disturbed. In his dreams he saw his Pretty spinning round and round. Its inhabitant, sitting awake, was smiling at him. He smiled back. Her pink light pulsed in time to the rhythm of her heart and Onk's breathing. They were united in synchronicity. So close had they become with just one word, Pretty, spoken between them. Despite losing her, Onk managed to fall into a restful sleep. Onk woke just before sunrise the following day. Something or someone had woken him. He was covered in a light dusting of chalky white powder, like the icing on a cake. Curious, he lay on the floorboards listening and watching the new day arrive. The day changed outside. The sun rose, flooding the downstairs with different hues of light coming in through the broken window pane glass. Onk lay motionless, trying to figure out what was different inside the house. Straight up above, on the ceiling, he spied the tattered remains of the central light fitting. Bare electricity cables dangled down. Gaps around the fitting enabled Onk to see into the room above. Amid the ceiling debris, one perfect blue eye stared down at him. Onk lowered his eyes to inspect the wall next. Then he realised the ceiling shouldn't have one blue eye in it. His gaze shot back up to the light fitting. The eye was gone. Rising to his feet, and quietly for a troll, Onk climbed what was left of the stairs. It wasn't easy. The banisters had disintegrated. The remains of that lay in the hall, a disjointed heap. The treads were missing in places, and Onk, jumping the gaps, wreaked havoc on the remaining structure. There were far more spaces in the grand staircase after Onk's ascent, but he wasn't worried about descending it later. He was no stranger to sleeping in old abandoned houses. Experience had taught him that these older ones often had another, smaller stairwell at the rear of the property. At the top of the stairs, Onk listened again. Nothing. He moved, not out of fear, for who would be stupid enough to attack an alert troll? But he sensed enough to know the house wasn't stable. Any moment he could fall through the rotten wood. He'd done it before. There was a scurrying sound, not unlike a large rodent, coming from the room above the drawing room where he'd spent the night. He advanced, interested despite the fact it was alive and hence not breakfast. Opening the door, he surveyed the interior. The eye was there. There was another next to it, and both of them belonged to a small child. A human child. A child who could see Onk, but who even Onk knew shouldn't be able to. Onk wasn't sure what to do next. He considered closing the door and walking away. It was the simplest choice, but he didn't do it. Instead, he crossed the threshold and entered the room. The child looked terrified. It was trembling, but it didn't move or speak. Onk couldn't figure out if the child was a boy or a girl, not that that mattered. He tried smiling. The child emitted a small squeak of terror, seeing so many ferocious-looking teeth. So Onk sat down. Copying Onk, the child sat down too. The air around it shimmered, its outline blurring as it moved. "Onk," he said, not being able to think of anything else to say to reassure the child. The child smiled and replied, "Bim." Its voice was soft and reedy, like a choir boy's. "Bim," repeated Onk, sounding out the name. His loud voice sounded harsh in the confines of the room compared to that of the child's. The child nodded and treated Onk to a wide smile. "Bim, Onk," said Onk. The child laughed, clapping its hands together with glee. The tension in the room eased down several notches. Reassured, the child got up and came over to where Onk sat. The child, a boy of about 4 years old, stared at Onk like he'd never seen such a thing before, and in all probability he hadn't. Onk watched the boy's outline shimmer again, like the boy wasn't quite in the Earth's dimension. "Gone?" said Onk, his voice sad, as he realised what he was seeing. The boy nodded, a smile dropping from his face. "Gone," the boy had replied. Looking down at Onk seated in front of his feet, he lifted his hand and stroked Onk's craggy chin in wonder. To Onk's astonishment, without further comment, the boy climbed into Onk's lap, and giving a huge mouth-wine yawn, Bim promptly went to sleep. Onk, surveying the sleeping child in his arms for several minutes, watched as Fim's outline shimmered and sparkled more and more till, like a breeze dying, the boy's body faded into the ether, leaving Earth's realm forever. Despite knowing Fim only a short while, something about the boy's trust in him completely had a profound effect of Onk. When Fim disappeared within the circle of his arms, strange feelings rose from deep inside Onk's heart. He felt an awakening, a stirring of emotions he'd never felt, compassion and honour. Strongest of all, love. Onk had never knowingly loved anyone or anything. His huge mind was built for eating and fighting and wenching. The last of these he'd yet to experience. He didn't understand what to make of these new emotions. They confused and beguiled him, and he didn't have enough vocabulary to explain them either. Feelings continued to surface and rove about Onk's large brain. His instincts told him he'd help the young boy who moments ago dissolved before his eyes pass over into the ultimate destination. Trolls didn't care about anybody except themselves. They were selfish and self-centered. Onk's life was at odds with his emerging values and experiences. He'd reached a crisis in his beliefs. There had to be more to living than food and fighting, he decided. Bim was beyond his care. But there was another life in this dimension Onk could care about. A life he could save. Join me next time, Chapter 10. See if Onk manages to save life. Thank you.